I moved to Daggerlin, Ohio because I thought small-town policing would be simpler. After 15 years working homicide in Cleveland, dealing with gang shootings and domestic murders that kept me awake nights, I figured I deserved something peaceful. Sheriff of a town with barely 3,000 people? How hard could it be? The breaking point had been the Morrison case, a father who'd beaten his 2-year-old son to death with a tire iron, then called 911 claiming the kid fell downstairs. I'd seen the crime scene photos, heard the father's lies, watched him walk free on a technicality. That night, I went home to my empty apartment, poured 3 fingers of bourbon, and decided I was done with big city policing. Done with the kind of evil that humans inflict on each other when nobody's watching. When the Daggerlin job posting crossed my desk, previous sheriff had died of a heart attack. They needed someone fast. It seemed like a sign. Small town surrounded by state forest, crime rate practically non-existent, biggest problems being drunk and disorderly on Saturday nights and the occasional vandalism. Perfect for a burned-out cop who wanted to spend his remaining years writing traffic tickets and helping old ladies find their lost cats. Turns out, I was wrong about simple. My first week on the job, I'm still learning where they keep the coffee filters when Deputy Mendez walks into my office with a missing person report. Carmen Mendez was maybe 30, competent and thorough, but something about her always seemed guarded, like she was holding back information she didn't think I needed to know. Her face had this tight expression I'd seen on cops before, the look you get when you know something's not right, but can't put your finger on what. Sheriff lost. We've got a missing child. Samantha Granger, age 7, last seen yesterday evening playing in her backyard. I took the report, scanning the details. Single mother, worked double shifts at the diner. Kid disappeared sometime between 6 and 8 p.m. while mom was inside making dinner. Standard stuff, unfortunately. In Cleveland, I'd worked dozens of missing children cases. Most were runaways, custody disputes, or tragically simple abductions. You followed the evidence, checked the obvious suspects, and usually found answers within 48 hours. Any signs of forced entry, custody disputes, known sex offenders in the area? Nothing like that. Mother says the father hasn't been in contact for years. We've got 2 registered offenders in the county, but both have solid alibis. But Sheriff... Mendez hesitated, glancing toward the window that faced the massive wall of trees surrounding our town. You should see the scene yourself. The Granger house sat on Maple Street, right where the residential area bumped up against the forest. I'd noticed during my first few days how all the streets in Daggerlin seemed to dead end at that tree line, like the town had been carved out of the woods rather than built beside them. The trees were old-growth oak and pine, some of them easily 100 feet tall, thick enough that you couldn't see more than 20 feet into the darkness between their trunks. During my initial tour of the town, I'd asked the mayor about the forest. "Oh, that's part of the Wayne National Forest System," he'd said, but then quickly changed the subject to budget concerns and staffing issues. I'd made a mental note to explore the hiking trails when I got settled. After 15 years of concrete and car exhaust, the idea of quiet woods appealed to me. Mrs. Granger met us at the front door, her eyes red from crying. She was maybe 35, thin from too much work and worry, with that worn look of a single mother who'd been fighting an uphill battle for years. Sheriff, she never wanders off. Never. Samantha knows to stay in the yard. I've taught her about strangers, about not talking to people she doesn't know. She's a good girl, always minds her rules. I introduced myself, kept my voice steady and reassuring. Standard procedure for missing children. Establish timeline, check family dynamics, rule out the obvious before considering worse possibilities. Ma'am, has anyone contacted Samantha's father recently? Any family disputes or custody issues? Her father's been gone since she was 2. My ex-mother-in-law lives in Florida. Last contact was Christmas cards. Sheriff, I'm telling you, something's wrong. Samantha wouldn't just leave. She's afraid of the dark, won't even go to the bathroom at night without the hallway light on. The backyard was small, maybe 30 feet square, with a swing set that had seen better days and a sandbox filled with the kind of plastic toys you buy at dollar stores. A chain-link fence separated the yard from the forest, though there was a gap near the back corner where the metal had been bent outward, just wide enough for a child to squeeze through. But what caught my attention were the footprints in the soft dirt near the back fence. Small sneaker prints, size 11 toddler, heading straight for the woods. The impressions were clear in the damp earth that had been moistened by the previous night's drizzle. I knelt down, studying the trail. In Cleveland, I'd learned to read crime scenes like books. Every detail told part of the story. These prints showed Samantha had walked, not run, toward the forest. Her gait was steady, deliberate. Not the panicked flight of a frightened child, not the stumbling steps of someone being forced. She'd gone willingly, purposefully. The prints continued through the gap in the fence, clear impressions in the softer soil on the forest side. But here's what bothered me. What made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. 10 feet past the fence, the footprints simply ended. Not like she'd reached hard ground where tracks wouldn't show. The forest floor was soft with decades of fallen leaves, perfect for holding impressions. I'd seen plenty of tracking scenarios during search and rescue training. You could follow footprints through much harder terrain than this. But Samantha's trail just stopped, as if she'd been plucked straight up into the air. "Mendez, you see this?" My deputy nodded, but something in her expression made me look twice. She wasn't studying the scene like a cop should, with the analytical eye that looks for evidence and explanations. She was avoiding looking directly at the tree line, her gaze sliding away from the dark spaces between the trees. Any wild animals in these woods? Bears, maybe? Something that might carry off a child? Nothing like that, Sheriff. The woods are, well, they're safe enough if you stick to the marked trails. Plenty of hikers use them during the day. Safe enough if you stick to the trails. Odd way to phrase it. In Cleveland, we'd say woods were safe or they weren't. We wouldn't add qualifiers about staying on designated paths. I spent another hour at the scene, following protocol I'd learned from years of missing person investigations. Used my phone to photograph the footprints from multiple angles, measured the stride length, checked the surrounding area for any signs of disturbance. The gap in the fence looked old, rusted metal edges worn smooth from repeated use. Kids had been squeezing through here for years. I interviewed the immediate neighbors systematically. David Winters from next door had been home all evening with his 8-year-old son Owen. Nice guy, genuinely concerned about Samantha. He worked as a maintenance supervisor at the county courthouse, seemed like the kind of reliable neighbor every parent hoped for. His kid, Owen, struck me as one of those observant children who notices everything adults miss, the type who'd make a good detective someday if he learned to ask the right questions. "Did you see Samantha yesterday evening?" I asked Owen, while his father watched from the porch. The boy nodded solemnly. She was playing with her dolls by the fence. Then she looked at the woods for a long time, like she was listening to something. "Listening to what?" Owen shrugged. "I couldn't hear it. But she got real still, like when my mom tells me to be quiet because she's on an important phone call. Then she put her dolls away neat and walked over to the fence and went through the hole." David Winters frowned. "Owen, you didn't mention that before when Mrs. Granger was asking about Samantha. You didn't ask me what I saw. You asked if I knew where she went. Kids, they see everything, tell you nothing unless you ask exactly the right questions. I spent the rest of the day canvassing the neighborhood, but the conversations all followed the same pattern. People were helpful, concerned, willing to let me search their properties and sheds. But the moment I mentioned organizing a search of the woods, they'd get uncomfortable. Lots of, "I'm sure she'll turn up," and "kids wander off all the time, they always come home." But nobody volunteered to help look beyond the tree line. The most I got was from Mrs. Patterson, who'd lived on Oak Street for 40 years. She invited me in for coffee, showed me old photos of neighborhood children, spoke fondly of watching Samantha walk to school each morning. "Sheriff, children have gotten lost in those woods before. Best thing is to organize a proper search party. Make sure you stick to the marked trails. The woods can be disorienting, easy to get turned around, especially for someone who doesn't know them well. Disorienting." Another careful word choice. In Cleveland, people would say woods were dangerous, or confusing, or thick. They wouldn't use a word like disorienting unless they meant something specific. By evening, I'd checked every obvious possibility. No family disputes, no registered sex offenders in the area, no signs of a struggle or forced abduction. I'd called the state police, requested they run Samantha's information through their database in case she'd been taken across county lines. Standard missing child protocol, everything by the book, but none of it felt right. Something about this case bothered me in ways I couldn't articulate, ways that went beyond the mysterious disappearance of the footprints. I went back to the Granger house as the sun was setting, hoping to spot something I'd missed in daylight. The backyard felt different at dusk. Shadows from the massive trees stretched across the lawn like grasping fingers. The forest seemed to loom larger, darker, more present. Temperature had dropped 10 degrees just from the shade of those ancient trees. That's when I found it. Caught on a thorn bush about 15 feet inside the tree line, right where Samantha's tracks disappeared. A small pink scarf I recognized from her school photo. The fabric was torn, as if it had been pulled free with some force, but there was no blood on it. I bagged it carefully, then stood there looking deeper into the woods. The trees were so thick that twilight had already become night between their trunks. Somewhere in that darkness, a 7-year-old girl was lost, scared, maybe hurt. Every instinct I'd developed in 15 years of police work told me to call in searchlights, tracking dogs, volunteer searchers, mount a proper search and rescue operation. But something else, some small voice in the back of my mind that had kept me alive through years of dangerous police work, whispered that conventional police work wasn't going to solve this case. I stood at the edge of those woods until full dark, studying the place where a child's footprints ended and the mysteries began, and wondered what the hell I'd gotten myself into in this quiet little town. 3 days after Samantha Granger vanished, Josh Maddox disappeared. I was finishing my morning coffee, reading through the previous sheriff's case files, trying to understand how this town had maintained such a low crime rate for decades, when Deputy Mendez walked in with that same tight expression I was beginning to recognize. "Sheriff, we've got another missing child, Josh Maddox, age 9, same circumstances as the Granger girl." The coffee turned bitter in my mouth. In 15 years of police work, I'd learned that missing children cases came in patterns. 1 child disappearing was tragedy. 2 children disappearing from the same small town within a week. That was a predator. Give me the details. Josh was playing in his backyard yesterday evening around 7 p.m. Mother was inside preparing dinner, checked on him at 7:30. He was gone. Backyard faces the forest, same as the Granger place. I was already reaching for my jacket. Any signs of struggle? Forced entry? No, sir. But Sheriff... Mendez hesitated. There are footprints leading to the tree line. Same pattern as before. The Maddox house sat on Pine Street, 3 blocks from where Samantha had vanished. Different neighborhood, same situation. Small yard butting up against that wall of ancient trees. Mrs. Maddox was a single mother too, worked as a cashier at the grocery store. Josh was her only child, a quiet kid who kept to himself. He never goes near the woods, she told me, wringing her hands exactly like Mrs. Granger had. I've told him 100 times to stay away from there. Josh is afraid of everything, won't even sleep without a nightlight. He wouldn't go into those trees. But the evidence said otherwise. Small sneaker prints, size 3 this time, leading straight from the sandbox to the forest edge. Same pattern as Samantha's tracks. Normal gait, no signs of force, ending abruptly 15 feet past the tree line. This time I was ready. I'd brought my crime scene kit, proper evidence bags, camera with good lighting. I photographed everything, measured stride patterns, checked for any disturbance that might explain how 2 children could simply vanish into thin air. That's when David Winters showed up. "Sheriff, I heard about Josh on the radio scanner. Is there anything I can do to help?" I'd been hoping someone would volunteer. In Cleveland, missing child cases brought out dozens of volunteers, concerned parents, community groups, retired cops. In Daggerlin, people expressed sympathy, but stayed home. "Actually, yes, I'm organizing a search party. Know anyone else who might help?" David nodded. "My wife can watch Owen. I know these woods better than most people. Used to hunt them with my father before." He paused. Before I decided hunting wasn't for me. Within an hour, I'd assembled what passed for a search party in Daggerlin. David Winters, 2 volunteers from the volunteer fire department, and Deputy Mendez. Not exactly the small army I'd hoped for, but it would have to do. I divided us into pairs, assigned grid coordinates, established radio check-in times, standard search and rescue protocol from my training in Cleveland. We'd work outward from Josh's last known position, sweeping in expanding circles until we found him or exhausted the daylight. Everyone stays on marked trails unless specifically authorized, I announced. Nobody goes alone. Radio check every 30 minutes. We're looking for a 9-year-old boy, probably scared and hiding. But something about this felt wrong. I'd worked search and rescue before, lost hikers, confused elderly people, runaway teenagers. You always found some trace, dropped belongings, broken branches where they'd pushed through underbrush, footprints in soft ground. Something. David and I took the eastern grid, following a trail that wound deeper into the forest than I'd been before. The woods were different than they looked from town. Darker. Older. Some of these oaks had to be 200 years old, their canopy so thick it blocked out the afternoon sun. The undergrowth was sparse, as if nothing could grow in the perpetual twilight beneath those ancient trees. "How long have you lived in Daggerlin?" I asked David as we walked. "My whole life. Grew up here, went to college downstate, came back to raise my family. It's a good place for kids. Usually. Another careful word choice. Ever have problems with missing children before?" David was quiet for so long I thought he hadn't heard the question. Then, "Sometimes kids get lost in the woods. It happens." "How often?" "I don't keep track. But Sheriff, there's something you should know about these woods. They're bigger than they look on the maps, older, easy to get turned around, even for people who know them well." We'd been walking for maybe 20 minutes when we heard it. A child's voice calling for help. Faint, coming from somewhere off the trail to our left. "Josh," I called back. "Help me. Please. I can't get out." David and I exchanged looks. The voice was coming from a thick stand of pine trees about 50 yards off the marked trail. Against every protocol I'd just established, we plunged into the undergrowth. We found Josh huddled behind a fallen log, shivering despite the warm afternoon. He was dirty, scratched from thorns, but alive. The relief I felt was so intense it almost buckled my knees. "Josh, it's okay. You're safe now. I'm Sheriff Lost." The boy looked up at me with eyes that had seen too much. "He's still out there. The tall man. He's been watching me." "What tall man, son?" "The one with the big smile." "He wanted me to come with him, but I hid. I've been hiding all night." David knelt beside the boy, his face pale. "Josh, can you describe this tall man?" "He was really tall. Taller than you, taller than anybody. And he had this smile like..." Josh struggled to find words. "Like when you smile but you don't mean it, like when grown-ups smile at you but they're angry." I was reaching for my radio to call off the search when the temperature dropped 20 degrees in the space of a heartbeat. The forest went silent. No bird calls, no insect sounds, nothing. Even the wind stopped. That's when I saw it. Something moved between the trees about 30 yards away. Tall. Much taller than any human had a right to be. The thing was standing perfectly still, but I could feel it watching us. Could sense its attention like pressure against my skull. David grabbed my arm. "We need to go. Now." But I was a cop. 15 years of training kicked in. If there was a predator in these woods, someone who'd been terrorizing children, my job was to stop him. I drew my service revolver. "Police! Step out where I can see you." The thing moved then. Not walking, not running, but flowing between the trees like smoke given form. And it was smiling. Josh hadn't been exaggerating. It had a smile that stretched too wide, showing too many teeth. I fired. 6 shots. Center mass. Just like I'd been trained. The gunshots were deafeningly loud in the forest silence. The bullets did nothing. Absolutely nothing. The thing kept coming, kept smiling, and I realized with ice-cold certainty that everything I'd learned about police work, about protecting people, about how the world worked, was completely useless here. David was pulling at my arm. "Run! George, we have to run." I grabbed Josh and we ran, crashed through undergrowth, stumbled over fallen logs, branches tearing at our clothes. Behind us, I could hear something large moving through the trees, but it wasn't pursuing us. It was herding us, driving us back toward the trail, back toward town. We burst out of the woods, gasping, Josh crying, David white as paper. I holstered my empty revolver with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. "What was that thing?" I asked. David looked back at the tree line. "I don't know, but it's been in these woods for as long as anyone can remember." That night, after Josh had been reunited with his mother and given my official statement about finding him lost but unharmed, I sat in my patrol car outside the sheriff's office and tried to make sense of what I'd seen. A man. Had to be a man. Maybe 7 feet tall, thin build, wearing dark clothing. Some kind of camouflage expert who knew these woods intimately. The smile was just tricks of light and shadow. The way the bullets seemed to have no effect. Maybe body armor, or maybe I'd missed in the poor light. But I was a good shot. In 15 years of police work, I'd drawn my weapon 12 times, fired it 4 times, and never missed what I was aiming at. I needed answers. Real answers. The sheriff's office had a basement storage room filled with decades of case files. I spent the rest of the night down there, going through boxes of reports, looking for patterns. What I found made my blood run cold. Missing children cases going back to the 1940s. Always the same circumstances. Children playing near the forest edge, footprints leading into the woods, then nothing. Some were found alive, like Josh, traumatized and babbling about tall men with terrible smiles. Others were never found at all. But here's what really bothered me. Every investigation ended the same way. Initial reports were thorough, professional, detailed. Then suddenly the cases would be closed with minimal explanation. No evidence of foul play. Likely runaway. Probable animal attack. As if someone had ordered the investigations shut down. I found the Billy Stout case from 1987. A drifter who'd been passing through town when 3 children went missing in the span of 2 weeks. He'd been arrested, tried, convicted, and executed for their murders, despite having an alibi and no physical evidence connecting him to the crimes. The real killer was never found. The children's bodies were never recovered. Billy Stout had been a scapegoat, someone the town could blame to avoid looking at the real truth. I sat in that basement until dawn, surrounded by decades of unsolved mysteries, and tried to accept what my rational mind refused to believe. Something lived in those woods, something that took children, something that bullets couldn't stop, and every sheriff who'd sat in my office before me had known about it. The woods kept their secrets, but they didn't keep them alone. The morning after my encounter in the woods, I couldn't shake the feeling that everyone in Daggerland was watching me. Not openly. Nobody stared or pointed, but I caught the sideways glances, the conversations that stopped when I walked into Mabel's diner for coffee, the way Deputy Mendez suddenly found paperwork fascinating whenever I tried to discuss what had happened during the search for Josh Maddox. They knew something. They all knew something. I'd filed my official report about finding Josh, lost but unharmed, made no mention of the creature that had smiled while bullets passed through it like smoke. What was I supposed to write? Encountered possible supernatural entity, discharged firearm with no effect, suspect may not be entirely human. They'd have me committed for psychological evaluation within 24 hours, but the silence was eating at me. 3 days of pretending everything was normal, 3 days of writing parking tickets and responding to noise complaints, while that thing lurked somewhere in the forest, probably watching the town, probably deciding which child to take next. I spent those 3 days studying the townspeople like crime scenes, looking for tells, for signs of guilty knowledge. The mayor stopped by my office twice to ask about progress on the missing children cases, with a tone that suggested he already knew there wouldn't be any. Mrs. Henderson from the grocery store, who'd been chatty and welcoming my first week, suddenly became all business when I shopped there. Even the teenagers who hung out behind the gas station scattered when they saw my patrol car, though I'd never given them any trouble. The worst part was Deputy Mendez. Carmen had been professional, helpful, competent since my first day, but now she couldn't meet my eyes. When I tried to discuss search protocols for future missing persons cases, she'd deflect to paperwork or radio maintenance. When I asked about previous sheriff's methods for handling similar situations, she'd suddenly remember urgent business elsewhere. "Mendez," I said on Thursday morning, catching her before she could escape to patrol duties. "We need to talk about what happened in the woods." She froze halfway to the door. "Sheriff, Josh Maddox was found safe. Case closed." "That's not what I'm talking about." "Sir, I don't know what you mean." But her hands were shaking as she reached for her keys. Deputy Carmen Mendez, who'd handled domestic violence calls and accident scenes without flinching, was terrified. Not of me, of this conversation. "Carmen, what aren't you telling me about those woods?" She turned then, and I saw something in her face I hadn't expected. Not just fear, but guilt. Deep, soul-crushing guilt that comes from years of keeping terrible secrets. "Sheriff, some things are better left alone. For everyone's safety." "Whose safety?" "The children's safety. The town's safety." She was backing toward the door now. "Sheriff, please. Don't ask questions you don't want answers to." She left me standing in the office, surrounded by case files and evidence that pointed toward impossible conclusions, wondering how many other conversations like this had happened in this room. How many other sheriffs had stood exactly where I was standing, feeling the walls close in as they realized the truth about their quiet little town. That afternoon, I remembered something Mrs. Patterson had said during my first investigation. "Sheriff, children have gotten lost in those woods before. Not like it was a general statement about kids wandering off, like she'd seen it happen, multiple times, like she had personal experience with the kind of disappearances that left footprints ending in empty air. Mrs. Patterson had lived on Oak Street for 40 years. She'd been here for some of those missing children cases I'd found in the basement files. She'd have memories that went deeper than sanitized official reports. She'd know the truth they were all so desperate to hide. I found her working in her garden that afternoon, tending roses that somehow bloomed despite being planted in the permanent shadow of the forest. She was maybe 75, with the careful movements and sharp eyes of someone who'd survived by paying attention to details others missed. "Mrs. Patterson, I was hoping we could talk about the woods." Her hands stilled on the pruning shears. For a long moment she didn't look up from her roses, and I could see her deciding whether to trust me or send me away with the same polite deflections I'd been getting all week. "Sheriff," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper, "some conversations are better had indoors, away from listening ears." She glanced toward the tree line as she said it, and I followed her gaze. Nothing moved in that green-black shadow, but somehow I got the impression that didn't mean nothing was watching. Her living room hadn't been updated since the Carter administration. Avocado green carpet, wood paneling, furniture covered in protective plastic. She drew the curtains before offering me tea I didn't want, checking the windows twice to make sure nobody could see in from the street. "Mrs. Patterson, I saw something in those woods. Something that shouldn't exist." Her teacup rattled against the saucer. "Sheriff, there are things in this world that decent people don't talk about. Things that are better left alone. 2 children have gone missing from this town in 1 week. I can't leave it alone. 2 children. She shook her head slowly. "Sheriff, you have no idea how lucky this town has been. 2 children in a single week? That's highly unusual." "How unusual?" Mrs. Patterson was quiet for so long I thought she'd decided not to answer. Then she got up with the careful movements of someone whose bones ached, went to an old secretary desk, and pulled out a photo album. Black and white pictures, school photos, family portraits, the kind of collection every grandmother keeps to remember children who'd grown up and moved away. Except some of these children had never grown up. She opened the album to a page near the middle, pointed to a school photo of a gap-toothed boy with freckles and a cowlick that wouldn't stay down. "This was my nephew, Timothy. Disappeared in 1962. He was 8 years old, playing in his backyard when his mother called him for dinner. She went inside to set the table, came back 5 minutes later to find his toys abandoned and his footprints leading straight to the forest. Then nothing. She turned the page. Another school photo, this one from the 1970s. A girl with pigtails and a shy smile that reminded me painfully of Samantha Granger. Sarah Mackenzie, 1974. Found her hiding in the woods 2 days after she vanished, babbling about tall men with terrible smiles who wanted her to come away with them. She never spoke properly again after that, spent the rest of her life in and out of mental institutions, died when she was 23. Suicide, another page, another child. This pattern repeated through decades of missing children, a photo album of horrors that the official reports had reduced to bureaucratic language and closed case files. Billy Morrison, 1983. Never found. His mother moved away 3 months later, couldn't stand living next to those trees. Sold the house for half what it was worth just to get away. Jennifer Walsh, 1991. Found alive, but... Mrs. Patterson's voice broke. She came back wrong, Sheriff. Wouldn't speak, wouldn't eat, just stared at the windows facing the woods. Her parents moved her to Florida, thinking a change of scenery might help, but she died anyway, wasted away like something inside her had been removed. Page after page of missing children, decades of disappearances that followed the same impossible pattern, footprints leading into the forest, then nothing. Some found alive but traumatized beyond repair, others never found at all. All of them swept under the official rug, filed away with minimal investigation, forgotten by everyone except the families who'd lived with the loss. Mrs. Patterson, I said, my voice hoarser than I'd expected. What's taking these children? Her hands were shaking now as she closed the photo album, held it against her chest like a shield against painful memories. Sheriff, some knowledge comes with a price. Once you know certain truths, you can't unknow them. They become part of you, eat at you from the inside. Are you sure you want to pay that price? I thought about Josh Maddox's terrified eyes as he described the tall man with the terrible smile. I thought about Samantha Granger's mother crying in her empty backyard, still setting 2 places at the dinner table every night. I thought about the thing in the woods that had smiled while I emptied my revolver into it, bullets passing through like it was made of shadow and malice. Tell me. She was quiet for another long moment, then got up and checked the curtains again, making sure they were completely closed, that nobody could see in from the street. There's something in those woods, Sheriff. Something that's been here longer than the town, longer than any of us can remember. The old-timers used to have a name for it, but names have power, and some names shouldn't be spoken aloud. What does it want? Children. But not just any children. It's particular. Selective about who it takes. Her voice dropped to barely above a whisper. It only takes the good ones. The good ones. I thought about Samantha Granger, who helped her mother set the table every night and never complained about their tiny apartment or secondhand clothes. Josh Maddox, too scared to sleep without a nightlight but brave enough to hide from monsters in the dark woods all night long. How long has this been going on? Since before I was born. My grandmother told me stories her grandmother had told her. The thing came with the first settlers, maybe. Or maybe it was already here when they arrived, and they just learned to live with it. And the town just accepts this? People just let their children get taken by some kind of monster. Mrs. Patterson's laugh was bitter, empty of humor. Sheriff, what choice do we have? Call the state police? The FBI? Tell them we've got a supernatural predator in our woods that's been stealing children for over a century? They'd lock us all up for mass hysteria. Someone must have tried to stop it. Someone must have fought back. Oh, people have tried, Sheriff. People have tried. She opened the photo album again, flipped to a section near the back filled with yellowed newspaper clippings. Sheriff Robert Hawkins, in 1967, organized a hunting party after 3 children disappeared in 1 month. 20 men with dogs and rifles went into those woods determined to find the thing responsible and put an end to it. She pointed to a yellowed newspaper headline. Local sheriff killed in hunting accident. Found his body 3 days later, torn apart like he'd been fed through a wood chipper. The hunting party said they'd gotten separated in the dense undergrowth, heard gunshots and screaming, found pieces of him scattered over a quarter-mile area. Official cause of death was mauling by unknown animal. Another clipping. Sheriff Marcus Morrison in 1981 tried a different approach. Thought maybe he could burn the thing out, organized a controlled forest fire to clear part of the woods where children kept disappearing. The headline read, "Sheriff's family dies in house fire." Mysterious electrical fire 2 weeks after his burning project. Killed his wife and 2 daughters while he was working late at the office. Fire department said the wiring was faulty, but Marcus had just had the house rewired 6 months earlier. More clippings, more attempts to fight back, more unexplained deaths that always seemed to target the families of people who got too aggressive about stopping the disappearances. Sheriff, the thing doesn't just protect itself, it protects its arrangement with the town. What arrangement? Mrs. Patterson's voice was breaking now, tears running down her wrinkled cheeks as she spoke truths she'd kept buried for decades. There's no formal arrangement, Sheriff. No contract or agreement or ceremony, but there's an understanding, an unspoken pact. As long as we don't interfere too much, as long as we don't try to hunt it or hurt it or expose it to outsiders, it keeps to its patterns. It takes what it needs and no more. What it needs. Every few years it takes 1 child, sometimes 2 if it's been a particularly long gap between takings. We mourn, we bury empty coffins, we tell ourselves it could have been worse. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely hold the photo album. Because it could be worse, Sheriff. It could take more. It could take adults. It could take anyone it wanted, anytime it wanted. But it has rules. It follows patterns, yes. Usually it's quieter. 1 child every 4 or 5 years, families that are already struggling, children from broken homes who won't be missed as much by the community. She wiped her eyes with a tissue that was already soaked. This week has been unusual. 2 children so close together, from stable families. Something has changed. The room felt like it was closing in on me, the walls pressing closer with each horrible revelation, the casual way she talked about acceptable losses, about children who wouldn't be missed as much, the calculated evil of it. Mrs. Patterson, who else knows about this arrangement, this pact? The mayor knows, the town council, all the longtime residents who've lived here more than 10 years. She looked at me with something like pity. Sheriff, your predecessor knew. Every sheriff for the past 60 years has known. It's part of the job. Part of the job. Keeping the secret. Filing the false reports. Making sure outside investigators don't dig too deep, don't ask too many questions, don't find evidence that might bring unwanted attention. She closed the photo album with finality. Sheriff Lost, I'm sorry. I know this isn't what you signed up for when you took this position. My mind was reeling. All those case files in the basement, all those investigations that mysteriously dead-ended with no evidence of foul play, all those sheriffs who'd sat in my office before me, knowing exactly what I now knew and doing nothing about it. They knew. They all knew. Deputy Mendez knew. The mayor knew. How many children had been sacrificed while good people stayed silent. The creature's lair. Where does it live? Where does it take the children? Sheriff, don't. Please, you can't fight this thing. Stronger men than you have tried, and they're all dead. Where? She grabbed my arm then, her grip surprisingly strong for a woman her age. Sheriff, listen to me carefully. The children who get taken, they don't come back. Not really. Even the ones like Josh who seem to escape, they're never the same afterward. Whatever happens to them in those tunnels, it breaks something inside them that can never be fixed. What tunnels? The old mining tunnels. From before the town was established, when this area was used for coal extraction. The entrance is about 2 miles past where the hiking trail markers end, hidden in a stand of dead oaks that never grew leaves, never bloomed, never showed any sign of life. Her voice was barely audible now. "But Sheriff, it's not just one creature down there. There are others. Things that serve it. Things that were once human but aren't anymore. The tunnels go deep, deeper than anyone has ever mapped. People who go down there don't come back up." I was already standing, already thinking about tactical equipment, backup plans, ways to approach an underground lair without proper backup. "Mrs. Patterson, thank you for telling me the truth. Finally. Sheriff, you can't save them. You have to understand that. The children who get taken are already gone, even if they're still breathing." She was crying again, harder now. "The best thing you can do, the only thing you can do, is learn to live with it, like the rest of us have." I was at her front door when she spoke again, her voice so quiet I almost didn't hear it. "Sheriff, there's one more thing I didn't tell you. About how it chooses them." I turned back. "It doesn't just take good children. It takes the ones who are special, pure in ways that other children aren't." She wiped her eyes again. "I mean, it can sense something in them, something that makes them different from children who lie to their parents, who steal candy, who hurt their siblings. The children it takes, they're the ones who still believe the world is fundamentally good, who haven't learned to be cruel yet." David was waiting for me outside Mrs. Patterson's house when I left. His face was hollow, eyes red from crying. He looked like a man who'd lost everything and had nothing left to lose. "Sheriff, they took Owen." The words hit me like a physical blow. After everything Mrs. Patterson had told me, after learning about the town's sick arrangement with the creature, I'd been expecting this. But expecting and experiencing are different things entirely. When? An hour ago. He was playing in the backyard while my wife made dinner. Same pattern as the others. Footprints leading to the trees, then nothing. His voice was shaking. "Sheriff, I can't lose my boy. I can't. David, I know where it takes them." He grabbed my arm. "Then we go get him." "It's not that simple. The thing down there, it's not human. It's not something we can arrest or reason with. I don't care what it is. It has my son." I looked back at Mrs. Patterson's house, curtains still drawn, an old woman sitting inside with her album of dead children, accepting horror as the price of peace. Then I looked at David Winters, a father who'd watched me empty my gun into a monster and still stood ready to follow me into hell. "David, if we do this, we probably won't come back. If we don't do this, Owen definitely won't come back." I made my decision. Maybe it was the right one. Maybe it was the stupidest thing I'd ever done. But I couldn't be another sheriff filing false reports while children disappeared into the dark. We'll need equipment. Road flares, flashlights, weapons, and we need to make ourselves bad. "What?" "Mrs. Patterson said the creature only takes the good ones. If we're going down there, we need to be the kind of people it doesn't want." Back at my house, I loaded my service revolver, my backup piece, a shotgun I'd brought from Cleveland. David had a hunting rifle and a face full of determination that wouldn't save his son, but might get him killed trying. "How do we make ourselves bad?" he asked. "I don't know. Steal something, lie, think cruel thoughts." The whole idea was insane, but everything about this situation was insane. Maybe just having selfish motives is enough. We drove to the forest in my patrol car, parked at the end of the hiking trail where the markers stopped. 2 miles deeper into the woods, Mrs. Patterson had said. A stand of dead oaks that never grew leaves. The forest felt different at night, alive in ways that made my skin crawl. Every shadow seemed to move. Every sound felt like something watching us from the darkness between the trees. We found the dead oaks exactly where she'd said they'd be. Twisted black trees that looked like they'd been burned from the inside, clustered around what looked like a natural depression in the ground. But when I shined my flashlight down into it, I could see worked stone. Steps carved into bedrock, leading down into absolute darkness. "This is it," I said. David was already starting down the steps. Owen, can you hear me?" David, wait. We need to be smart about this. But he was already disappearing into the tunnel mouth, rifle in one hand, flashlight in the other, calling his son's name into the dark. I followed him down. The tunnels were older than I'd expected, not just mining shafts, but something that predated them. The walls were smooth stone, carved with symbols that hurt to look at directly. Our flashlight beams revealed passages branching off in all directions, a maze that extended far deeper than any coal mine had a right to go. Owen, David's voice echoed off stone walls. Owen, where are you? Somewhere in the darkness ahead of us, something answered. Not Owen, something else. A sound like laughter mixed with the screech of metal on stone. We followed the main tunnel deeper, past side passages that breathed cold air and whispered with sounds that might have been voices. The walls were covered in scratches now, claw marks, and something else. Children's drawings scratched into the stone, crude stick figures holding hands with tall, smiling shapes that made my stomach turn. Sheriff, David whispered. Look. His flashlight illuminated a wider chamber ahead. The walls were covered in belongings. Backpacks, toys, shoes, clothes, decades worth of children's possessions arranged like trophies. And in the center of the chamber, a pile of small bones picked clean. Owen's backpack was sitting on top of the pile, still warm. No, David whispered. No, no, no. That's when we heard it. Owen's voice, weak but alive, coming from deeper in the tunnels. Dad? Dad, help me. David was moving before I could stop him, running toward his son's voice, rifle forgotten in his desperation. I followed, but the tunnels seemed to shift around us, passages appearing and disappearing in the flashlight beams. We found them in a chamber that opened up into a vast underground cavern. Owen was there, huddled against the far wall, alive but wrong somehow. His eyes were too wide, his smile too fixed, and standing over him was the creature from the forest. Up close, it was worse than I'd imagined. 8 feet tall, impossibly thin, with arms that reached nearly to the ground. Its face was almost human, but the smile stretched too wide, showing rows of teeth like broken glass. It was wearing clothes, bits and pieces taken from its victims over the years. A child's baseball cap, a woman's necklace, a man's wedding ring. Sheriff lost, it said, and its voice was like gravel sliding down a metal chute. Welcome to my home. I was wondering when you'd visit. I raised my shotgun. Let the boy go. The thing laughed. Oh, Sheriff, haven't you learned? Your weapons don't work on me. Dad, Owen called out. Dad, it says it's going to keep me forever. David raised his rifle. Get away from my son. The creature moved faster than anything had a right to move. One moment it was standing over Owen, the next it was flowing across the cavern floor like liquid shadow. David fired twice before it reached him. The bullets passed through it like smoke. Then its claws found David's throat. No! Shooting. Nothing. David screaming. Claws everywhere. Blood. So much blood. The creature was tearing him apart. Owen watching, crying. Dad! Dad! I kept firing. Shells. Empty clicks. Useless. The creature looked at me over David's body, smiled wider. Your turn, Sheriff. But David wasn't dead. Still moving, still breathing, crawling toward Owen through his own blood. Unless, the creature continued, you leave. Walk away, let me keep the boy. I'll even let you live. That's when I understood. The creature's rules. It only took the good ones. It killed adults who interfered. But what if... Wait, I said. David was dying. Owen was crying, and I was about to do the most selfish thing of my career. I'll make you a deal, I told the creature. Sheriff? David gasped. I'll leave. Like you want. But I want something in return. The creature tilted its head, intrigued. What could you possibly offer me? Information. I know things about this town you might find useful. Sheriff, don't, David whispered. But I was already committed to being the kind of person the creature wouldn't want. Corrupt, selfish, willing to bargain with monsters. There are other children in town. Good children. Pure ones. I can tell you which families never lock their doors, Which backyards have gaps in the fences? My voice was getting steadier as I spoke these horrible words. I can make your hunting much easier. The creature's smile faltered slightly. It was listening. In exchange, you let Owen live. Not as your prisoner, but alive and free. And you give me professional courtesy, sheriff to local authority. David was staring at me with disgust and disbelief. You would betray innocent children to save one? The creature asked. I would betray anyone to stay alive, I lied. That's what makes me bad, right? Selfish enough that you don't want me? The creature studied me for a long moment. Then it started to laugh. Oh, Sheriff, you think you're being clever. You think you can trick me with false corruption. It leaned closer. I can smell goodness on people, Sheriff. It has a scent, and you still reek of heroism. That's when David made his move. While the creature was focused on me, he'd crawled close enough to grab one of the road flares from my equipment pack. Now he pulled the cap, ignited it, and thrust the burning end directly into the creature's leg. The thing screamed, not with pain, with rage, but something else too. Surprise. The flare was burning it, actually burning it. Fire! I shouted. David, it's afraid of fire. I ignited my own flare. David had 2 more going. The creature was backing away from us, but now it was trapped against the far wall of the cavern where Owen crouched. The old mining tunnels, David gasped through his injuries. Coal dust, gas pockets. This whole place is a fire trap. The creature lunged at him, claws extended. But David rolled away, dragging his broken body between Owen and the monster. The flare caught the creature's arm. More screaming. I was moving now. Flares, all of them. Throwing them at the walls, the ceiling, anything that would burn. The cavern filled with smoke and chemical light. George, David shouted. The support beams. Old wooden beams held up parts of the tunnel system, dry as tinder after decades underground. I touched my flare to the nearest one. It caught immediately. The creature was retreating now, flowing back toward the deeper tunnels. Away from the fire. Away from Owen. We need to get out, I said. This whole place is going to come down. David was barely conscious, but he managed to grab Owen. The boy was traumatized, but mobile. We stumbled through the smoke-filled tunnels as fire spread behind us, following wooden supports and coal dust deposits. Behind us, the creature was screaming something in a language that predated human speech. We burst out of the dead oaks into pre-dawn forest air just as the ground shook beneath our feet. Somewhere deep underground, support structures were collapsing. Fire was consuming decades of accumulated horror. Is it dead? Owen asked, clinging to his father. I don't know, I said. But it's trapped. For now. David survived his injuries, though he spent 3 weeks in the hospital and never fully recovered. Owen went through months of therapy, but eventually started sleeping through the night again. As for me, I learned something important that night in the tunnels. Sometimes being good means being willing to appear bad. Sometimes protecting people requires you to lie to monsters. I filed my report that morning, like always. David Winters and his son injured in a cave-in while searching for the lost Granger and Maddox children. Structural collapse deemed too dangerous for further search efforts. Area permanently closed to civilian access. My phone rang around noon. Mrs. Henderson from dispatch. Sheriff, we've got some teenagers trying to climb over the new barriers you put up around the forest access points. Send Mendez out there, I said. Have her arrest them for trespassing. Maybe a night in jail will teach them to respect closed areas. Yes, sir. I hung up and walked to my office window. The forest stretched out beyond the town limits, but now there were barriers, warning signs, official restrictions. No more children would wander into those woods alone. The creature might still be alive down there, trapped in collapsed tunnels, healing from fire damage. But it would have to dig itself out before it could hunt again. That would take time, maybe years. And if it ever did surface again, at least now I knew how to fight it. The woods had kept their secrets for generations, but some secrets weren't meant to be kept forever. I turned back to my desk and got to work. There were patrol schedules to arrange, safety inspections to conduct, the ordinary business of protecting a town where everyone could sleep a little easier knowing someone was watching the tree line. For now, That was enough.